6 dead, 8 injured in the terrorist attack on Muslims at the mosque in Quebec City. I wanted all of us to talk about it. We're going to have a whole nother story about the immigration ban. Of course, that's going to leak into this story as well, but make sure that you stay tuned for that video because that will come out later today after this one. But first and foremost, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he called the shooting, quote, a terrorist attack on Muslims. He offered his condolences. This was yesterday. We all saw the news. When I saw it, I was just like, it just seems like that every day we're getting more and more bad news. It's tough. So let's talk about this is a breaking story. It's an evolving story. It's an open investigation. So we do not have all the details. And as soon as this video goes up, there's going to be more details. So we can only talk about what we are given at this moment. So we know that two men have been arrested. They're in their 20s and early 30s. On the way here, I heard that one of the suspects is actually a witness. Now, that is not confirmed, but maybe later we'll find out if that is confirmed, that it's now only one shooter and one witness. But both men are being detained. The other suspect actually called and disclosed his whereabouts to the authorities. Also, the investigation, according to the authorities, the Canadian authorities, they said that the two suspects do not have any prior records. They have not released names. If you go on social media, you'll see so many different accounts, whether it's fake news accounts or people claiming that they have leaked information, or just pure speculation about who these people are, whether they are refugees or Muslims or alt-right white supremacists. There's so much speculation. We do not have any of that right now. So therefore, we're not going to announce who these people are. The names have not been announced, but perhaps by the time this video comes out, you guys will already know. But we can only go off what we know at this moment. When you guys saw this, I mean, this too, we should talk about that this mosque has been a target before. It was not a target of a shooting, but this specific mosque in Quebec City, there was also some Islamophobic rhetoric, I believe. I don't have it in front of me. It was a pig head, right?
Yeah,
it was a pig head, and it says something like bon appetit. And they had like a real severed pig head in front of the mosque, considering that, Muslims, they don't eat pork. Is that right?
Yeah, super Jewish.
So.
Well, it just shows you the overlap in the religions.
Thanks.
Like the first book of all of them is pretty much the same.
Right, yeah. So, okay, given that this is falling on the heels of the immigration ban, where we are already so worked up and riled up, and there's already so much divisiveness within the country and the world, then we see this. How did you guys feel about all this?
I think it's super telling. Well, it's weird. I mean, first of all, it's tough not to run to your corners in this situation. It's interesting that on the heels of the Trump ban on immigration, which we'll talk about in length in other videos, the first major attack is against Muslims. The question is this the kind of action that inspires people to act on really shitty instincts of hatred? And then what was so frustrating is to hear the president's press secretary, Sean Spicer, then say that this is why President Trump is being so proactive versus reactive, when the immigration ban against Muslims against people from 7 countries that seem to be hotbeds of terrorism, but going against Muslims and favoring Christians in all those situations, it's just strange to see who's co-opting this event for what purpose.
Right, exactly. Grace and then Jason.
I think that history will take note of how we respond to the persecution of Muslims right now, because it seems like what we are doing, or what we are seeing from at least the leaders of our government in the United States, and I do think that Brett makes a good point about emboldening other people in other countries, is we are othering an entire religion, and we are saying that they are to blame for the acts of very few, this entire religion.
1.6 billion people, I believe, right,
yes,
are Muslims. So I just wanted to clarify that,
right,
so people at home can have this idea of how vast that is.
Right.
Peaceful.
Right, and I think another great point that Brett brings up is that the first book, and where a lot of people get, oh my gosh, the Quran is so violent. Look at the Old Testament. The Old Testament, I'm a Christian. I have a Bible verse tattooed on my arm. The Old Testament is violent as shit. And we don't judge all Christians based off of the belief, because you say that you believe Christianity, therefore you must believe that we put women in caves on their periods. Yeah, there are some practices by Muslim extremists that I don't agree with, and that a lot of other Muslims do not agree with. And there are people that are now, it's like a witch hunt going after an entire religion, and it's incredibly dangerous. And history will look back on how we reacted to these events.
Right, 'cause
and how we stood up for an entire religion being discriminated against. It's really important that we act with compassion.
Yeah.
For sure. Compassion is such a great word to use, because I want to speak to my Muslim friends who I was around with yesterday how they felt, because I mean, I am not Muslim, but being of the LGBT community, I'm also compartmentalized. Sorry, I can't even talk this morning. But for me, it's just so shocking that this is happening. I was telling Amir this morning, I've never been more fearful for our future ever in my life. And then also too, how dangerous the situation is. I mean, even though it happened not in the United States, but in Quebec, everyone's now watching. So how we move forward is really gonna decide what happens after this. You know, it's like it's with the whole ban on the United States. Let's talk about that. With the whole ban here on those seven countries of the United States, and our issues with terrorism or crime. Now, if we don't handle this with care, we're just going to send a message to them that, we're going to piss them off even more, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right, it hurts the relations. And to
Absolutely.
speak of those 7, and we will have a full video regarding the immigration ban, but to speak of those 7 countries, so we have here that are predominantly Muslim nations. That's why so many people are calling it a Muslim ban. Even though President Trump is saying, President Trump, that's the first time I've said that, wow. Even though President Trump is saying this is not a Muslim ban, even though he called it a Muslim ban during his campaign, even though Rudy Giuliani called it a Muslim ban and said that Trump called it a Muslim ban, regardless, these are 7 predominantly Muslim nations: Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. And no citizen from these countries have ever committed or killed a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil. So the 4 countries that really are higher threats of terrorism or harbor terrorists or have terrorist camps, those are not on there. And some people are speculating and pointing fingers to Donald Trump, saying, why aren't those countries being targeted? And not to expand the Muslim ban, but just to point out that he has business relations there. Now, also, I think that we should talk about, too, something that you mentioned, because this isn't just Democrats and Republicans speaking out for this specific terrorist attack and the immigration ban. So, and to piggyback what you said and what you said, to echo your sentiment, everyone's watching. What is the example that we want to be as a nation when it comes to immigration? And of course there needs to be immigration reform, but perpetuating this Islamophobic and xenophobic rhetoric. This is not the answer. And a lot of Republicans have come forward too. Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, they spoke out against the action, saying in a joint statement that the government has a responsibility to defend its borders, but must uphold all that is decent and exceptional about our nation. And the reason why I bring this up with Quebec City and what happened there is kind of what you mentioned, is how we're going to look at this in the sense that, is this inspiring further? I mean, the victims were Muslims, right?
Yeah. Look at where this conversation went, right?
I know.
And there's a possibility to hold multiple perspectives looking at the same situation, even within your own mind. And I think the one most decent and positive, optimistic way to look at this in a terrible, terrible situation is the people killed were people. They were Muslim people, sure, killed by who knows what this guy was doing it for. I have a pretty good idea based on who he chose to target and the severed pig's head. But when we move on to statements about American immigration policy and the greater repercussions throughout the Middle East and why we're picking and choosing certain countries, we need to come back to Quebec City, to the steps of this mosque where this actually happened, and just find that ground we all can agree on and should agree on before we go to our corners, which is people were murdered by someone who showed up with a gun to kill them. But that's it. These are human beings. And before you extrapolate to Muslim ban, September 11th, just remember that fact.
And
Final
I think
thought,
that's a great point to end on. These are human beings, and what we're seeing is major government heads trying to other a population of humans, of people whose lives were then taken. You're saying they're not people, they're Muslims, and that's not right. We can't break it down by religion, and that's what we're seeing us try to be divided based on religion.
And it's the shitty tiptoeing that happens and the strange co-opting that you have to look in the eyes of these folks when you see Sean Spicer say things like, that's why we want to be proactive. What That doesn't make any sense. That has no relation to what we're talking about.
Right.
Just remember, these are individuals that were killed.
Absolutely. With families, people, it could have been you, it could have been me, and it's, before we move on to our next story, which is, stay tuned for it, which is going to talk we're going to talk further about the immigration ban. Yeah, this, like I said, this is an open investigation, and the story and the facts are going to continue to come out, and 6 people died. And I think that's what we need to remember. And we need to remember those people and just remember that we're all one. And to be targeted for your religion is so scary. And my heart goes out to all the families out there and to all the victims. So stay tuned for our other video. It's going to come out shortly on the immigration ban, and we're going to continue that conversation.